Toyota has built trucks for soldiers, ranchers, and cartographers who map roads that don't technically exist yet. But somewhere between the Land Cruiser's calm reputation and the Hilux's dirt road stubbornness, there's a machine that isn't supposed to be sitting on any dealer lot, a six-wheeled outlier built for the kind of obsession that doesn't stop where the pavement does. Toyota refers to it, in documents that were never meant to leave an internal server, as the Wildland Ranger 6x6. By the end of this, you'll understand why almost nobody outside a small circle of engineers has actually stood next to one. Quick ask, before we get into it, hit follow now, because what's coming in the next few minutes won't stay up on every platform for long. Start at the front end. No chrome badge, no trim callouts, just a single stamped Toyota lettering across a blacked out grille, slats pulled back at a steeper angle than anything currently in the lineup, clearing space for a hidden LED array that only shows itself once the low beam's cut out. The fender flares aren't bolted on plastic. They're widened sheet metal, welded in place, covering a third axle tucked almost invisibly behind the rear wheel, while the detail that gives this away as a 6x6 before you've even counted the tires. 39-inch mud terrains, portal-style axle housings lifting the differentials above wading height, and a snorkel routed up the driver's A-pillar instead of the usual fender mount position. Here's the honest part. The extra axle adds close to 4 feet to the wheelbase, and the rear overhang eats into the departure angle, a compromise the standard cab Tacoma never has to make. That's the shell. What's underneath it is the part that actually explains why this exists. Under the hood reportedly sits a twin-turbocharged V6. The same basic architecture Toyota's been running through the Land Cruiser 300 and the Tundra, retuned here for low-end torque instead of highway pull. Figures circulating among people who claim to have seen the spec sheet put output around 442 horsepower and 649 newton-meters of torque, routed through locking differentials across all 3 axles. Toyota's own internal weighting numbers again, unconfirmed list affording depth just short of 1.2 meters, deeper than the standard Land Cruiser's rating. The third axle changes the truck's whole relationship with a washed-out trail. Weight distribution flattens, traction on loose rock nearly doubles, and body roll on off-camber ground drops noticeably. The trade-off is a turning radius that's almost embarrassing in a parking lot. This was never built for city blocks. If those numbers hold, that's a machine treating obstacles most trucks stop for as a Tuesday. But there's a number bigger than the horsepower figure, and it's the one that actually explains this whole project. We're getting to it right now. Inside, the cabin strips away almost everything Toyota normally adds for comfort. No third row option, no fold flat rear bench, just 2 rows, a reinforced roll cage running through the headliner, and a center console built around a single sealed hub for satellite communication instead of a screen for entertainment. The seats are cut from a burn-resistant weave and bolted directly to the frame rather than the floor pan, so losing a wheel on one axle doesn't compromise the whole cabin structure. Looking at this, it feels like sitting inside something built for a person who already decided the nearest town isn't coming. To help, every choice inside this cabin assumes distance, assumes silence, assumes the next living person you talk to might be a voice on a radio and nothing else. And here's the number worth sitting with. According to the same internal paperwork, Toyota is reportedly capping global production at 300 units, not per year, total, ever making the Wildland Ranger 6x6 rarer than most limited Land Cruiser heritage runs combined. 300. Let that sit for a second. Most of the trucks people call rare online were still built in the thousands. Here's the detail that's harder to fake. Toyota's TNGA-F body-on-frame platform, the same underpinning shared by the Land Cruiser 300, the Tundra, and the Sequoia, was engineered from the start with a modular rear frame extension mount Nothing on Toyota's consumer side has ever used that mount for a third axle before. If the Wildland Ranger 6x6 is real, this is almost certainly the frame architecture it borrows from, which is exactly why engineers inside an advanced concepts studio could plausibly build this without starting from a blank sheet. Off the frame, the tech runs quiet. A low bandwidth satellite messenger built into the dash instead of a touchscreen stack. A solar intake wired straight to an auxiliary battery bank under the bed floor, and a manual air-down valve at each wheel so a driver can adjust tire pressure from the cab without stepping into whatever they just drove into. No app, no subscription, just switches. Toyota hasn't confirmed a price, and probably won't for a long time, if this ever reaches a showroom floor at all. But price was never really the question with something built like this. The real question is who Toyota is even building it for. Not weekend campers. Not the crowd cross-shopping a 4Runner against a Bronco. This is aimed at expedition outfitters, wildlife researchers working 6-day stretches from the nearest fuel station, and disaster response teams who need to cross a washed-out river without waiting on a bridge crew. If that's the kind of driving you actually do, this is worth knowing exists, even if you never get near one. And when it comes to what this thing might actually cost, there's one number from one real automaker that puts the whole picture in perspective. That's next. Here's the anchor point. Mercedes-Benz once sold a 6-wheeled off-roader to actual civilians, the G63 6x6, for right around $500,000 when it left European dealer floors, and buyers lined up anyway. If Toyota's Wildland Ranger 6x6 ever gets a sticker, and pricing patterns for anything this limited hold the way they usually do, expect it to land nowhere near a Tacoma's price tag and much closer to Mercedes' number, possibly under it, given Toyota's manufacturing scale, but not by a wide margin. And that's really the story here. Of the 300 units reportedly planned, insiders suggest fewer than 40 were ever slated to reach North America, meaning most people watching this will statistically never stand next to one in a parking lot, let alone drive it. This isn't a truck built to be seen. It's built for people whose relationship with distance borders on obsession, the kind that doesn't get satisfied by a weekend trailhead. Looking at everything this represents, the caged interior, the sealed comms, the axle count, most drivers will never need. It feels less like a Toyota and more like equipment that happens to carry a Toyota badge. That's not a compliment every truck earns, and it's not one Toyota hands out often. If the reporting holds, and if this ever gets let out of the concepts studio, the Wildland Ranger 6x6 won't be something you cross-shop. It'll be something you either already need or you'll never think about again. And for the handful of teams it was actually built for, that obsession is the entire point. So here's the real question, not for comment section fun, but for real. If you run expeditions, remote research, or disaster response for a living, is this the platform you'd actually field? Or does a third axle create more logistics than it solves? Tell me which side you're on, because that answer decides what we tear down next. Because next time, we're pulling the file on the one Toyota concept that never even made it to a leaked photo, just 3 engineers, a locked NDA, and a number that made Toyota's own legal team nervous.